Our next speaker, Diego Oppenheimer, embodies what the AI industry is all about. After spending more than 5 years at Microsoft, Diego started a company 7 years ago called Algorithmia that is focused on helping enterprises adopt AI and actually reap value from their AI investments. Ultimately, making AI work in an enterprise production setting isn't an easy task, and Algorithmia has been at the forefront of making AI easy. Over 110,000 engineers and data scientists have used Algorithmia's platform to date, including the United Nations, government intelligence agencies, and Fortune 500 companies. Join me in welcoming Diego to our stage.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So let me go ahead and hit real quick and share my screen. Great. So today what we'll be talking about is MLOps and the rise of governance. And so the core of what we'll be talking about is that AI is no longer this theoretical science. What we're really seeing right now is enterprises really seeing what machine learning and AI can do for their organizations. They're looking at how they're going to mature their deployment and building of ML applications. How are they going to get through the hurdles to overcome that? How they're going to increase their maturity and really get to that point where we're industrializing the operations behind machine learning, specifically the lifecycle and how we actually do monitoring, reporting, and auditing. So I'll be talking a lot about this, today, in a guide onto how we can explore that governance, how we can explore that maturity level. But really quickly about myself, I'm the CEO and founder of Algorithmia. I've been working on data tools for over 15 years and building those out across the board. So every year, Algorithmia does a survey around how ML is being used in the enterprise, who's using it, what are the use cases. And one of the interesting things is, in case anybody didn't realize, there's a big pandemic this year, and that has a pretty big shift in terms of how organizations look at what they're doing. And so one of the clear things was that of organizations looking at how their spend was doing, how they're forecasting, how their use cases, ML is top of mind and increasing spend across of this. So that's a pretty clear indication that we're moving away from this innovation or exploratory world into real things that have real ROI and actually change the course of our businesses, seeing this actual reinvestment in that. And a couple of the use cases that we see: increasing customer experience, reduction in costs, looking at fraud. So this is across the board, we saw an increase in these use cases that can be actually addressed with machine learning and AI. So when we look at the maturity, right, of machine learning operations and management, where are the challenges? What are the things that are actually avoiding organizations actually be able to get up and running? So the first one is stuck in the lab. So this is, how do we actually go from a laptop or a data science or a workbook or a notebook or Jupyter notebook into actual production? How do we actually make that move into a production environment? Disconnected teams. How is my data science and machine learning team talking to the DevOps teams, talking to the governance teams, talking to the risk teams? How are we actually getting all on the same page in terms of how we're going to go actually get these machine learning models in production? Technology mismatch is around the massive amount of frameworks and technology investment. There's a new framework every day. How do we actually match those two things up? Are we using Python? Are you using Java? Are you using R? How does an organization get around being actually built for repeatability and scale and security? Stakeholder buy-in. How do we actually get our C-levels to sponsor these projects, get behind them, see why they're worth investing in, and continue to unblock us in actually getting these workloads into production? And then as we create this massive roadmap of dev tools and DevOps tools and machine learning tools, how do we maintain those? How do we actually run those at scale? How do we make sure that we're continuing to move forward our platforms? So each one of these contributes quite a bit into an inefficient machine learning lifecycle. And this translates into about 50% of machine learning projects never see the light of day. And sometimes it takes over 18 months to go from a lab to deploying these models in production, and that becomes extremely problematic. So when we look at maturity, and this is a self-assessment type of thing, how do we actually determine maturity inside an organization? So we have organizational alignment, we have data, we have training, we have deployment, we have management, we have governance. And each one of these, we put a low, medium, high around it. So when we talk about organizational alignment, a low is there's no dedicated data scientists. These are tools that are actually chosen by any practitioner. Everything's ad hoc. So one of the things here is this is a clear place where you'll be stuck in the lab. right? What happens when we actually need to get this into production? How are we going to go do this? A high level of maturity, by contrast, is when we actually start having these centralized data science services, standard ops and management platforms, and actually KPIs and performance management that actually allows you to go out, grow on that. And so what we really want to get to is, how do we actually make model reuse to be easy? How do we actually look at what the business demand is and actually justify the investments that we're doing from an organizational perspective? And then how do we get those budget justifications for projects? So we want to move up this organizational alignment maturity level to get to a high level degree where we can actually get these kind of investments. So where does ROI for AI and ML happen? Well, the first one is in optimizations, improving productivity, reducing costs. The second level is this improved decision-making tranche, where we have these improved customer experience, revenue, margin. These first two categories are where 90% of the successful projects are today. And it makes sense because these are the ones that are attainable, they can be defined, they can be brought into a measured and actually achieved in a somewhat short period of time. Where we tend to try to go do is in this business model innovation. We want to disrupt industries. We want to create new markets, new revenue streams. And the value truly is transformational, but also so is the risk. And so when we look at an organization and actually assess where you are from a maturity perspective, because if you're in a low maturity perspective from an organizational alignment and you're going straight for the business model innovation, kind of disruption, this is going to be problematic. And so actually being able to go through a crawl, walk, run type of process becomes a good way of focusing on this. And again, what are we looking at? What happens when we don't do these things? Well, time to production is going to be costly to us. We're going to lose the opportunity of these models, and the labor and infrastructure, scalability, capacity, resiliency, and maintenance are going to become problematic if we don't address these early on. So when we talk about data and training, right? Low is, really ad hoc, individual data owners, data scientists, limited IT oversight of these projects. You're going to have data quality problems, access problems, cleaning problems. And this actually drives to a really expensive training, the process. How do I get to my data? How do I get the proper clean data? Can I actually access it? And so what we really want to do is drive our organization towards a high level of maturity in the data and training. So how do we actually, some organizations look at it having a chief data officer or subject matter experts that can actually own the data streams, ETL, and the data management systems. We start looking at tools like data warehouses and data lakes, multiple machine learning frameworks, and then having an actual, what we call a data first or data as a first class citizen inside an organization is the first step in actually increasing maturity so that you can actually achieve the ROI behind machine learning. So when we look at management, we look at management and operations. So deployment and operations management is a really key part of focus. A low maturity level in an organization is usually data scientists are responsible for everything. They have to take everything from the data to grading the model to deploying it to actually running it in production. And this is really hamstrings their capabilities. You'll see growing pains around time to production being way too long, path to production being blocked by IT, limited tooling, and really everything is manual. I have to redo it over and over again. Once we start going into a medium level of maturity, you'll start seeing new personas popping up. Data scientists, developers, DevOps engineers. They're going to start automating with scripting. They're going to have platform-specific infrastructure management. And they're going to start looking at configuration-specific automation and script management. How do we actually create some sort of repeatability? This is a great step forward. And then immediately what you're going to see, in terms of growing pains here are, how does our infrastructure start growing a lot larger than expected? How do we actually integrate with our current DevOps tooling that already exists? And how do we start eating away at that tech debt that is actually piling up? So when I look at a high degree of maturity in this space, we're seeing data scientists, developers, and DevOps all working together. They're looking at tools that are going to automate this entire workflow. So you're looking at deployment automation and role-specific tools. And then from an ops perspective, one button deployment, full continuous integration and continuous deployment integration, completely infrastructure agnostic tooling, and now integrated into the DevOps components that an organization exists. Because once you can actually achieve that level of integration, you can now actually have the data scientists, developers, and DevOps working on the same page, working on the same process, which again is, how do we get ROI out of our machine learning efforts? Well, we put them in production. You will never get ROI unless we get them into production. So the faster we get them into production, the faster the value that we're going to be able to actually achieve behind this. So we want to build that stack that matches your needs, right? So today we usually see a lack of a defined technology stack or best practices. There's no building for repeatability, measurability, auditability. Again, this drives back to how do we actually do governance and what's happening inside my organization with ML. We don't want proprietary locking into specific tooling. I can't have an entire governance stack for one kind of model and another governance stack for another kind of model. That's just never going to work. How do we're not thinking about data access. And so what we really want to do to increase our maturity level is how do we best build the best ML architecture for my organization? I'm going to have a wide variety of data science tooling. I'm likely going to have one or two, at least, infrastructure providers. I'm going to have more than one deployment technology. And then I have defined paths for continuous integration, continuous deployment inside my organization, application integrations. And at the end of the day, what are these applications or the end user are going to be actually consuming this machine learning? So being able to map this inside your organization, understand on how we actually go from a built model all the way to being consumed and how we can build that out from a repeatable way is extremely important for success and getting to an ROI point with your machine learning efforts. So how do we actually democratize ML inside an organization? Well, what we want to do is create an ML platform or ops platform that is highly flexible, highly extensible, and highly integratable. We want to be able to use whatever data science tooling we want. We want to be able to connect to whatever data services. We want to be able to track our code and the same way that we track any other code. We want the widest variety of ability to use different frameworks and libraries. And we want to be able to lay this down on the computational resources which are convenient from a cost, data security, or governance perspective that I've determined, and the full flexibility of calling these ML models from whatever kind of application I want. And so when we start thinking about how do we build for the future? How do we build for repeatability? How do we build? We really want to take that integration first approach, understand what's laid down inside my organization. How am I actually going to plug in all these operations into that? So let's think about governance. How do we actually increase our maturity in governance? So the lowest level is there is none, right? And we've seen this quite a bit. You've probably seen this inside your organizations. Data scientists working on their own, tracking models inside spreadsheets. There's no ops. There's an increasing number of data sets. There's no compliance. We actually get to that point where we can't answer the question of who called what, when, with what data, and why. And that now becomes an extremely big risk, especially when we're automating operations with machine and decision-making with machine learning. We get to that medium level of maturity. Data scientists, developers, and DevOps are already personas that exist in your organization. There's disconnected reporting tool, usually by business unit, maybe by framework, maybe by tool that they're using. And so everything around management is completely ad hoc. How do we actually audit multiple models and data access for compliance? How do we understand what models are going to drift, where's the noticeable impact, and what are my investments on an organizational level are looking at? So we really want to try to move towards that high level of governance and maturity, which is working together, data scientists, developers, DevOps, chief risk officers. From a tooling perspective, you want to start looking at MLOps as a governance platform. Who's calling what with what data, what time, at all times being able to answer that. How do I attach my investments in a specific model to the cost of running that model, but also to the ROI that the business is actually getting from that model? And then from an ops perspective, how do we actually determine access, policy, reporting, integrated with the tooling today? Let's be real, right? Governance already exists in IT today. There's restrictions around access controls. There's restrictions about computational resources. There's auditability on how these things are being used. How do we start taking advantage? How does our MLOps platform start sending data to those systems so that you can actually integrate with them in the same way that you're doing at the rest of your technology stack? So governance and security become super important. From a governance perspective, how do we manage your ML lifecycle with tools to support internal and external compliance? Performance monitoring for model risk, model and data access controls, user group access controls, tracking and reporting on metrics, and then having chargebacks and showbacks. Who called what, when, how do we pass that bill? Nobody wants to take the entire P&L of running ML at scale in an organization on theirs. And then from a security perspective, again, how do we start bringing in the best practices of my IT security organizations? data at rest and in-flight encryption, network security integrations, private and public certificate authorities, authenticated proxies, SSO support, air-gapped environments. So again, this is what brings in all under the governance and security. How do we manage across infrastructure, data, network, and models? And how do we do that with the policies that exist today in our organization? So what you want to really do is be charting your own maturity level, understanding where you are today and how you can actually increase that. And so being honest and auditing on a regular basis, hey, how do I actually look at, where I am today, low, medium, on each one of these individual elements, identify where, we can do that, and how do we actually get to that increase? And really, how do you know that you've achieved a high level of maturity? Well, you now start seeing executives who can identify challenges like wasted productivity, versioning, cost management. We can actually answer which models are being used where our risk is coming from, where our cost is coming from, where we should continue investing in these areas where ML can really drive forward our operations. So one way of thinking about these maturity milestones, and what I want to offer is kind of an operational litmus test of sorts for MLOps. On a security side, can I actually integrate with my current security models from an infrastructure, data, and model perspective? Can I actually support governance and compliance reporting? Can I actually scale my infrastructure for cost and performance? Can I monitor all my models in a global way for drift, risk, and performance? And now what my speed looks like from deploying models in hours, not days or weeks, and providing model reusability and automation. So if I can actually answer these things inside my organization, you might actually have achieved a quite high level of maturity. But if not, there's an easy way of actually moving forward on that and looking at assessing where you are today and how you can actually move that forward. So really quickly, and to kind of start wrapping up, Algorithmia Enterprise, for those of you who know, is a model deployment, operations, and governance platform. It allows you to connect, load, catalog, version, and validate models in production. We could take care of managing the cost, controlling the infrastructure, providing you full usage metrics and operations in the fastest way to get your models into production, and a full governance and security layer that integrates with your IT policies today inside your organization. For those of you who want to map out where you are today, you can actually download the roadmap to ML maturity. You can actually chart where you are today and look at what the next steps to increasing your maturity inside your organization. And again, each organization is going to be on a different path. You might have achieved high levels of maturity in some areas, low levels of maturity in others. And this is a good guide, completely product agnostic, to actually understand where you are and how you can achieve the next milestone. And with that said, I'm going to start wrapping up. I want to thank everybody very much for listening to me today. And it was an absolute pleasure chatting with you.